Someone said to me once, if someone doesn't care about injuring themselves or chopping off a finger, they're certainly not going to care about customer quality. And that always stuck with me. I think it was close to $600 million in debt to go from $1 billion in revenues to $2 billion in revenues in the previous 12 to 18 months. My mindset is 24/7 all in on how do we save this business? How do we improve the business? And not, high on my list of what I probably do well. I mean, it is sort of communicating where we're going. Younger folks who are listening to this realizes the power of what can happen to a company that you own over a decade.
Today, I'm joined by James Lindstrom. James is a seasoned CEO with a remarkable track record of transforming struggling businesses into profitable enterprises and building companies through strategic acquisitions. James's story is truly fascinating. He served as a chairman, president, and chief executive officer of Integrated Electrical Services, or IES, where he led a complete financial turnaround and strategic transformation. He then became president and CEO of Providence Service Corporation, a publicly traded holding company with nearly $2 billion in revenue. Most recently, James founded Verdian Insights, a company focused on acquiring and growing impactful governance, risk, and compliance solutions. In just 4 years, Verdian has completed 6 major acquisitions, including Compliance Week, Financial Crime Academy, Education Workers Group, and several other training and certification companies. In fact, I know James from the acquisition of the Financial Crime Academy, which I previously founded and built. I then sold the majority interest to James in 2024. In this episode, we explore the invaluable lessons James has learned over time during his executive career, leading turnarounds at IES and Providence, the challenges of balancing operational improvements with capital allocation as a CEO, and how those experiences shaped his approach to building Verdian Insights. We will dive deep into his acquisition strategy, why he focuses specifically on the governance, risk, and compliance sector, and what he looks for when evaluating potential companies to his portfolio. Whether you're an executive navigating organizational transformation, an entrepreneur considering acquisitions as a growth strategy, or a professional interested in the rapidly evolving governance, risk, and compliance industry, this conversation offers masterclass level insights from someone who has successfully operated on both sides of the table as a corporate executive and company builder. This is Business Unbound. Let's dive in. Quick moment of honesty. Business Unbound is brand new. We are in the early days of something that I genuinely believe in, a show dedicated to real conversation with forward-thinking business leaders and inspiring individuals who are having a real impact on this world. And that's where you come in. I need your help. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, please follow the show and leave a rating. It sounds simple, but it shows the algorithm that this content matters and it directly impacts how ambitious professionals like you discover these conversations. It sounds simple, but it shows that this content matters and it directly impacts how many ambitious professionals like you discover these conversations. When you're helping me, you're not just supporting a show. Here's what you're really doing. You're saying that quality business conversations deserve a platform. You're saying substance matters over hype. And you're saying this mission is worth building. So if this resonates with you, help me reach others like you. Subscribe, follow, share, whatever works for wherever you are. You're helping build something substantial from the ground up, and I genuinely appreciate it. So thank you. And now back to the show. James Lindstrom, welcome to Business Unbound.
Hi, Florian. Thanks for having me.
James, you've had an impressive career leading major turnarounds and now building a company through acquisitions. But let's go back to the beginning. What drew you first into the world of business and finance back in the days?
That's a long time ago. So going back probably 40 years, when I was 13, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, the home of the Buffalo Evening News. And I think we also had some other Berkshire Hathaway type companies. And between sort of an early interest in Berkshire Hathaway and just sort of reading a lot, I was very interested in the news and learning about different things. I sort of found my way into the investing world. I also didn't grow up from a family with a lot. We're sort of lower middle class, and so I'd say just trying to make some money was at the heart of it as well. I mean, I remember when I had saved up $1,000 and going to the stockbroker's office and trying to buy my first stock and mutual fund, and sitting down and having the conversation and, talking about stocks sort of, it's just sort of accelerated my interest.
How did this first investment turn out?
Well, there were a couple. So one was a company called KinderCare, which did okay in the short term. There's another company called Ecology and Environment, where the stock basically didn't move until maybe it was bought 30 years later by a private equity firm. Not bad, not great, kind of okay.
I've actually read in your college alumni profile from Tuck School of Business that you, well, as you said, developed a passion for reading and, in particular, annual reports in high school and learning what made exceptional businesses tick. And I would say, if I look at myself back in the days, that's not typical for a teenager, perhaps. So, what was it about businesses and investing that captured your imagination so early?
Well, again, I was sort of reading, figuring out what sort of made them tick, and I loved reading. So I read the newspaper every day. I actually watched the news, every night, and still do, and do it with my kids sometimes. In terms of annual reports, I mean, part of it was trying to find stocks and finding undiscovered sort of gems, and they were free, right? Back then, you could just fill out a form or call up the company, send a letter, and they would send an annual report. I think what's different between sort of back then and today is um, that report was printed out. It might have been 40 pages or 50 pages or 100 pages, but there was anticipation actually like receiving it. It's not like going to the internet where I could find a certain aspect like in 10 seconds and then my attention gets drawn to something else. There was an anticipation. I was really looking forward to it, and I didn't have anything to distract me. So when you got in a report, you read it, you digested it, you sort of really understood it. Versus today, it's just a different sort of, that scenario doesn't exist.
And I would say this early passion, it became kind of a theme for your career. In your early years, if I understand correctly, you joined first Boston's investment banking group and then moved into an operational role at a pharmaceutical company that had just gone public. And at the time, you were only in your early 20s. What did these experiences teach you about, well, the difference between analyzing a business from the outside versus running it from the inside, perhaps?
Yeah. And I'd done some internships between sort of high school, where I guess one other thing that piqued my interest was a group of us won the Buffalo Evening News stock picking contest.
Mhm.
And then I went into a series of internships in the finance industry, in the investment industry. So I actually interned for Capital Cities Capital, an investment group of Capital Cities, which was owned by Berkshire Hathaway. So, but what I found was I had this great opportunity to join this client of ours, of First Boston, with my mentor, who was very encouraging of it. And I think the big, takeaway was, I'd spent so much time in the spreadsheets and understanding the numbers and understanding sort of the inputs to how sort of the math worked. But when you get inside a company and you're dealing with, people from all different backgrounds, in all sorts of, from different geographies and different educational levels, different levels of experience and different specialties, the spreadsheets kind of matter, but they kind of don't. And it goes back to, Peter Drucker, when he's famous for saying culture eats strategy. Culture can eat spreadsheets too. so, um, so so I think, the people aspect and the cultural aspect is something that I really saw the importance of. And it's really difficult to sort of understand that from a annual report, or a spreadsheet. Or clues, that you can pick up, but not, it's very difficult until you're inside of a company to really understand.
Right. And since we're talking about this, we may actually touch on this a little bit later. But this was, well, you said earlier, 40 years ago, and then maybe when you started working at First Boston, 35, 30 years ago. Are there some universal truths that you learned at the time which still hold true today
In terms of,
in terms of what makes businesses successful?
oh, I, I think it's, there are multiple truths that sort of play into that. I think about it in a 4-piece framework. I think you need to have the strategy right. You need to have operations, that are efficient and optimized. You need to have really good capital allocation, which management teams in general are not sort of trained in. And then you have to have good governance. So strategy, operations, capital allocation, and governance are sort of the 4 buckets that I sort of think about.
What about people and having the right people on the bus?
Oh, absolutely. And I think people sort of play into sort of each of those, particularly into the operational side. That's where, in the last company I ran, we had 16,000 people, and that's where the rubber met the road on the operational side. And that's where, you can have pockets where, you have a culture or a set of values and ethics that isn't on par with the rest of the business, and that's where you can see challenges or issues, or you could see cultures on the other hand that are incredible in a lot of different ways, and you can see that sort of correlated with the performance of the business. And you can, one of the ways, a little thing that I've learned over the years, I forget who I learned it from, was when I was an investment professional for one of the funds that invested in the companies that I worked in, I got to walk around a lot of plants. I mean, I've probably been in 100 manufacturing plants. And I remember, I always looked at the safety board in the plants to see, look at recordable incidents or the safety stats for the company. And because someone said to me once, if someone doesn't care about maybe injuring themselves or chopping off a finger, they're certainly not going to care about customer quality. And that always stuck with me. So again, that people aspect and their values and their ethics and their culture certainly can be, in my view, correlated with performance and value creation.
That is an interesting reflection, and let's discuss this a little bit later. Taking one step back and looking at your background, after your first years of working experience, you eventually pursued an MBA degree at Tuck School of Business. And I'm curious, what did that experience give you that pure work experience from your first few years possibly couldn't give you?
Yeah, I feel like I had built a lot of skills between working in investment banking and then working in a company that was part turnaround. It was a company called Kyrex. I did acquisitions, so there was a lot that I saw in there. I think going to a place where there was a general MBA approach sort of rounded out my skills and exposed me to things I hadn't been exposed to, like, marketing, for example, organizational design, taking a negotiations class to, give me frameworks to work with for the rest of my life. So that's one. 2 was we had some professors who, I thought investment banking was hard, but some professors who really drove us hard, and to drill in sort of 5 levels below where I might naturally drill in to a business problem. And then 3, the network. I think you've talked about, your network that you developed, and the network for Dartmouth, where Tuck is based, is incredible. And I still have close relationships. I'm a godfather to, a Tuck classmate's son. I've worked with Tuck classmates. I have investors who were from the Tuck alumni network. So that's sort of those are the 3 reasons or benefits that I saw from it.
And it seems to me that the calculus and what you got out of it certainly paid off to a certain degree. Shortly after tech, you became CFO at Central Financial Corporation when you were still quite young. And I'm really interested. How have you been able to get into a CFO position pretty much right out of business school?
Yeah. Well, relationships. So I had the Kyrex, which was a went public in '96. We sold it in 2000 when I was at business school. We went public at 13. We sold for 31 and a quarter. So it was a very good sort of very good return for shareholders. Um, some people who were shareholders in Kyrex were also shareholders in Centru, and there was an activist in it who wanted the bank sold. It was actually called Kankakee Federal. The investor that I knew did not want it sold. He saw sort of great potential to turn the business around and do acquisitions. And so he said, Jim, you're 28 or 29. Here's a great opportunity. It's right in, you can live in downtown Chicago. Meanwhile, it was about an hour drive away. And so I took the job. Thought it was a great opportunity. My old mentor from Kyrex became chairman. Uh, and so we were off to the races. So it was a little bit, it was relationships. It was based on past performance. And then, in terms of me going into it, it was probably a decent amount of not knowing what I didn't know. I'd never been in the industry before. It hadn't been in the role, but I wanted to give it a shot.
And I think it's remarkable to assume a CFO position if you're only 28 or 29 years old. Can you perhaps take us back a little bit to this moment? What was it like to join at this young age? How were your first few days like, if you still recall?
Well, luckily I had, some experience before where I learned, you know, I was an outsider at Kyrex. We bought a business in England. We bought a business in Scotland. We bought some struggling, we had a struggling operation. And I'd made some mistakes about going in there, maybe being from the Wall Street background, making some incorrect assumptions about what people could do, where their incentives were. And so, I'd probably had some more of a respect for the role, the power of the role, uh, um, trying to understand more from where, just because there's some poor performance in the bank. It wasn't necessarily the employee's fault. In fact, it was more the board and the previous CEO's, fault for the situation of the business. And so trying to go in with empathy while also balancing, like, we need to get this sort of bank back on track, is difficult to do. So it was intimidating. I was, had some confidence because I could see the playbook of what we needed to do on the spreadsheet. But again, balancing the spreadsheet with actually, the cultural aspect of the business, it's not easy. And when you walk in and see this was a publicly traded bank, stuff, spreadsheets being, well, I guess it's not a spreadsheet, but people doing, some of the accounting on paper, right? Like, there's a lot of work to do. Yeah. Yeah. It's not, but you can also look at that and be like, what a great opportunity. So, yeah, sorry, a lot of thoughts there.
No, that it all makes perfect sense. And I mean, this career transition, you said, okay, maybe not so much experience in this particular sector. And then in 2010, you joined Integrated Electrical Services, and you again had a career transition to an entirely new industry. And you joined as a director, and the year after you became CEO. And I understand Integrated Electrical Services, IES, was in trouble at that time. Can you walk us through what you found when you were?
Sure. And this is when I start to build through the theme, because it also, what you skipped over a bit was my time in between Centru. I
Mhm.
stepped out after about 3 years and went to work for the primary shareholder who brought me into it, a firm by the name of Tontine Partners in Greenwich, Connecticut, which was technically a hedge fund, but operated um, not quite like a hedge fund, more like a long-term investor. Um, so I was there for um, about 5 years, where and then inherited IES, where I went on the board, and the company was in very rough shape. It was about a half a billion in revenues. It was losing, roughly $30 million of cash a year. It had gone through 6 CEOs since 1999. Had been through bankruptcy in 2006, and Tontine Partners owned. I forget the exact percentage, but well into the double digits, was the lead investor, and so the partner that was on IES left, and I went on the board to replace him. And what I saw, and this is where the theme has started to emerge, is, like Centru, it was a business that had done a number of acquisitions, um, uh, that kind of forgot its core businesses and what it did really well and what it maybe didn't do so well. Um, you took some too many risks on the balance sheet, and so created debt issues. Maybe created some risks on the balance sheet that the outside investor didn't see. So we were doing some large construction projects, and you have exposures, financial exposure to sureties. You create liabilities by taking on long-term contracts, maybe at fixed prices. Um, so at the end of the day, the company was trying to do way too much, was spread way too thin. Um, and I guess the last thing I'd say is, and this is natural to a lot of companies, when there start to be failures in the operations, you can have, particularly in a larger public company, some pretty smart people in the corporate headquarters. And the natural inclination is, well, I can fix this. We need to add more resources at headquarters. Let me take this over. I mean, I could use the term empire building. I'm not sure if that was the case or not, but take control of it. And, at the end of the day, corporate headquarters, I find, often are not smarter at maybe fixing the problem than getting sort of really good people in the field and supporting them, closer to the operations and the customer.
Right. And I think this is a powerful reflection. And you had this reflective moment, apparently. You came in, you became CEO eventually in a difficult situation. What did you do to try to navigate the organization out of this crisis?
What's a long list of
Uh-huh.
tactics, but the again, the main theme was around simplification. So we were doing too much. We were in some businesses that we shouldn't have been in. We had no, I wouldn't even use the word competitive advantage. We weren't even sort of average. So, some businesses we had to shut down, we had to sell some. Um, so that's sort of on one end. And then we had to discover what we were really good at and go through a process to figure that out. And that some of it's pretty obvious, to me up front. Some of it takes time and takes some digging. But then we're like, we want this to be a long-term sustainable business. And so how do we find resources to put into those businesses and really see them grow? Because you need to, you can't just cut cut a business to cut costs to prosperity, right? You need to reinvest somewhere to have a sustainable business. So, and that's sort of high level. I think the other thing some tactics that we did, we focused a lot on cash generation, um, and return on invested capital, which is not a concept that a lot of public companies focus on. And that's probably another theme that I've really thought about across my career, is return on capital. Um, so again, there are a lot, but I think all those things um, brought trust to shareholders between IES and the shareholders. It brought trust for us with the banks and the sureties. And so that that sort of compounded on itself, and it enabled us to, um, get financial support. Um, we started to attract people back to IES, and then it sort of compounded and started to build on itself, and we dug ourselves out of the hole. Um, yeah, but it took a good 18 months to do that.
And you didn't stay for too long at IES in the end. You joined Providence Service Corporation in 2015, 4 or 5 years later after your time at IES. Can you just walk us through how you ended up at Providence Service Corporation?
Yeah, so I think I was at IES for probably about 3.5 years in the CEO. Um, and I was business was about $500 million at that point. The stock had sort of tripled or quadrupled under my watch, so it was a great win. Um, I think I had a great mentor at Tontine Partners who owned an increasing part of the company. And I think I was being recruited to become CEO of a company that was about 4 times the size, not just domestic, but was in 14 countries. And I'd say on the surface, had businesses that had recurring revenue, um, were capital light, had all these great things that you don't quite see in construction. We had some great businesses in IES, or really good ones. Um, at least from the outside with Providence, you had businesses in the healthcare and government services field, where they could generate capital, and we could actually buy more businesses over time and build sort of a longer term, platform. Um, so, so it was a great sort of global opportunity on a much bigger stage that I was excited about.
Also a complex and diverse business. And I'm wondering a little bit, again, this is possibly an industry change that you underwent. Of course, you were in an executive capacity, but still different business, different degree of complexity. How did you approach understanding and learning such a multifaceted organization as Providence was at the time?
Yeah, so I did a lot of traveling. Like
Mhm.
with IES, I was on the road a lot, visiting operations because I found there's nothing like visiting with customers and frontline, team members to really understand the business and where the pitfalls might be and where the opportunities are. I mean, that's how we found IES's data center business, which went from 80 million in revenue in 2011 to today it's probably, I don't know, 400 or 500 million. Um, so you've got to be out there traveling and talking with people, on the front line to really understand the business. Again, getting outside of corporate and getting outside the spreadsheets. Yeah.
And let's actually dive a little bit deeper into your turnaround and transformation experience. And I want to bring up a point. I would say that one of the fundamental challenges in leading turnarounds or leading in any crisis situation, and I've seen this in my own work, is that you have to address immediate problems on the one hand, while simultaneously setting up the organization for long-term success. From your experience at IES and also at Providence and possibly thereafter, what's the hardest tension that you faced as a turnaround CEO?
I think it depends on the scenario. IES, it was very clear to
Mhm.
everybody. I mean, people had given up on that stock. You couldn't give it away. The stock was at $1.82. Today it's at 400. So everyone is sort of, is very bought in. But that was at a stage where, you're lucky people were showing up to work. And so, um, for those who had confidence in you and your strategy to get out of this hole, and you had confidence in them, that was a great win-win situation. Providence was different. The stock had not cratered. They had taken on, I think it was close to $600 million in debt to go from $1 billion in revenues to $2 billion in revenues in the previous 12 to 18 months. So there was a lot of excitement. What people didn't understand was what had been bought and the issues with what had been acquired by the management team. And so that creates a different dynamic where I'm in the seat saying, wow, we have a lot of debt and we have some businesses that are underperforming. And I have shareholders who don't quite understand that. You have a board that doesn't quite understand that. And you have other people on the management team that don't quite understand that. And partially because they're the ones who did the acquisitions. So that's a very different, dynamic to drive operational improvement and change when the catalyst hadn't hit yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Right.
it does. And I like the theme of clarity. In a recent interview that you gave, I think it was the Think Like an Owner podcast, we
Yeah.
actually talked about the importance of building clarity and helping people prioritize, bringing others along, possibly the shareholders, the management board, and making everyone really see how one thing affects the others. And these sound simple in theory, but are possibly incredibly difficult to implement in practice, especially in distressed situations. So, can you perhaps share a specific example from your CEO experience where you had to drive this sense of clarity, how you did it?
Yeah, it's not always easy in a true turnaround because you're acting with sort of real urgency. And this is probably where it's more of a personal challenge of mine. Um, my mindset is 24/7 all in on how do we save this business? How do we improve the business? And not, high on my list of what I probably do well. I mean, it is sort of communicating where we're going. I can see it in my head very well. I'm probably not the best communicator of it. I try to find people can help sort of translate and communicate, where we're going. Um, and so finding those partners or doing it yourself around communicating that clarity or where you're going is important. I think what's key to it is you need to inspire confidence in your stakeholders that um, where you're going, but that you're going to get it done. Because if people don't believe that you're going to get it done, the best ones will walk, you know? And so, um, and you have to have confidence in the people who are going to help sort of get the organization there as well. So it really takes confidence on both sides. And, not everyone, that creates a situation where some, there are some people who don't stay along for the ride, whether they choose not to, or it's just not the for the organization. Um, that unfortunately, happens in a lot of scenarios.
Right.
Um,
And
so
can you perhaps give a few concrete examples of how you would build confidence in these two directions, how you build confidence towards the management board and the shareholders that you're the right person, that you can do this job, and also towards the wider organization and the staff. How do you build confidence there?
so I have you heard of the Lindy principle at all? So the Lindy principle, no relation to Lindstrom or me. That was my nickname in high school. It basically says the longer something's been around,
Hmm.
the longer the life it will have. Um, Obviously, that's not in a perishable item, but in a business that can apply. So I look a lot at history of the business, and what I'll try to do is sort of simplify and expose where we've done really well, where what, and sort of strip away everything else, or show you know what how these other areas where we haven't done so well, and really drilled in, and then say, look, we've got to make some choices, right? We can't continue along this path and try to you know offer these 5 different services to our customers. And so let's prioritize them. Let's focus in on this one. And then let's really sort of run with this one, but we can't do everything. And so I'd say and then so people can see, and I can see the proven sort of track record. and that core confidence that of what the organization or the company does well, which gives you a lot of confidence to like, all right, we've done it this far. We can sort of continue that and run with it. It's not easy to find that. And there's things you have to sort of spin people that don't come along for the ride because maybe they're doing one of these other four things. So again, it's not easy. It's easier than it sounds. I guess what I'm trying to say, but that's really, I
Yeah.
think, core part of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think different individuals and different schools of thought have different names for the same underlying principle, right? In consulting, we tend to call these quick wins. Quick wins can help to build trust and credibility. If you demonstrate that you are able to deliver results, this builds trust and credibility. And I think there's a scholar, John P. Cotter, if I remember correctly. Um, he talks about transformation, and he also says in the early times of any transformation project, you have to demonstrate that you're building momentum and you need to have some signs of early success. And they don't have to be massive, right? It can be anything of some form of a meaning where everybody would agree, okay, this was important and it's great that we did it successfully. And you can leverage this to build momentum going forward to tackle the more difficult challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's fine. It's tough to find those quick wins. And I probably don't celebrate those enough. I think, you know, um, it can take a while to get those. And so I think, one thing that I think I mentioned earlier was, for maybe every area that you cut back, you've got to invest as well. Right. And show that you're willing to invest in the business for the future. And you're investing in sort of maybe that core area that you think is, going to be the winner longer term. So,
And looking back at your time at IES and Providence, can you perhaps share like one major mistake or a misjudgment that was made at the time under your leadership, which, well, maybe looked good from the get-go, but was a mistake in hindsight?
well, I think I tend to operate with, this comes a phrase that comes from Power Corp of Canada, the founder, but he wrote one time in one of his shareholder letters about acting with, I'm going to screw it up, but basically short-term urgency and long-term strategic goals.
Mhm.
That tends to be sort of the way I operate. I'm very I want to imagine what this company could be 5 or 10 years out, but work my tail off and have, the team work very hard and feel this sort of sense of urgency, to get it into a place where it can, get to reach those goals. So I'd say patience, um,
Mhm.
long term, a long term perspective is an area that I've got caught in the trap of being too short term. One public one that I can talk about is, um, when I joined IES, the stock was at $1.82 and he couldn't give it away. And when I was there, it, tripled or quadrupled, which is in 3 years is great. And that was in 2015 when I left. Over time, I sold the stock. I had several 100,000 shares and the stock is now at 400. That's 200x in a decade. Sorry, a little more than a decade, almost 15 years. And so, the learning is, and the takeaway that I hope, people your age and younger folks who are listening to this realize is the power of what can happen to a company that you own over a decade. So a lot of private equity firms, or private equity investors, or investors in general, build models that are 3 to 5 years long. And I understand it's hard to predict even 3 to 5 years. But if you take that model out and if you have a company that has a buy and build strategy and you continue to buy more businesses over 10 years, the returns are far greater than if you held the business for 3 to 5 years. So Mitch Rales, I think, has talked about this publicly a lot. Like it takes 10 years, Mitch Rales from Danaher, it takes 10 years to really see the fruits of your labor and the returns, um, from an owner's perspective, really become outsized. So
And this might actually be an excellent segue into what you did next during your own professional life. You founded Verdian Insights, which is also your current focus area, with a strategy to acquire and grow businesses. I'm wondering a little bit, okay, what led you to making this transition in the first place? Why start Verdian rather than taking on another CEO role, for example?
so a couple reasons. One was, um, I had been traveling all over the world for several years, and that placed a lot of pressure on my family and home life. Um, so I had a 9-year-old and twins who were a few years younger, and I wanted to spend more time with the family. And the business, taking on a global turnaround is, you don't have a lot of time for family. I did not coach soccer teams or baseball teams. So I wanted to find a business in a situation where, I had more time for family and myself. I had gotten to the point where I wanted to um, be in control of my own destiny, that destiny as much as possible. And even though I was CEO of a few public companies, there was a fund in each situation where, at the end of the day, um, I was reporting to all shareholders, but they had an outsized influence. And, there were some areas, where I had some differences of opinion on things like governance, values, that I was kind of tired of, um, not being able to sort of set the right tone there.
And just for our audience, can you perhaps explain what Verdian is and what it is that you're doing?
Sure. So um, uh, I launched it initially in 2020 to acquire a business in the environmental, social, and governance space, a reporting management business called Buzzword. And I was looking at buying smaller businesses in the governance, risk, and compliance area. I consider ESG to be, pretty closely related to GRC. To buy businesses in the GRC space where there was some broader impact. So whether it be training and certification, software, um, we're now in the media business a little bit, events, membership. So all these types of businesses where um, there was sort of outsized sort of impact beyond sort of the four walls of where the operation was really focused. So everything that we're adding is um, has impact sort of around the world, in each of their own ways.
According to recent market research, and I looked at this as part of preparing for our discussion today, the global GRC and compliance market was valued at approximately $63 billion in 2024 and is projected to reach $135 billion by 2030, which is a compound annual growth rate of over 13%. And I'm wondering from your perspective as a business buyer in this space, what specific trends are driving this growth, and which of these trends maybe present great opportunities for your own portfolio?
Yeah. So GRC is like ESG is a broad space. And so there are niches within GRC. Some will go up, some will go down, like ESG. I sold Buzzword, that ESG business that I first bought about a year and a half ago. And subsequently we've seen the ESG sort of tailwinds um, uh, dissipate here in the U.S. and in a few global areas. Um, so ones that I'm more excited about are areas that are probably less government driven and more market driven. And so, when you think about areas like fraud, the government is, very involved in places like the UK, to help prevent fraud within the business community. In the US, that exists, but there's a great business reason why why organizations are focused on on anti-financial crime and fraud. So it doesn't need to be government driven. So I think where there's a sort of business case, like an anti-financial crime, I think is a great place to be over the next few years. Because as we've seen, the government winds can swing, and from and create a lot of turbulence. So if there's a business case, things tend to those tailwinds can last a bit longer.
And in light of what you explained, can you walk us through your overarching acquisition strategy? Like, how do you identify targets? What are you looking for? How do you determine if it's a good fit for your existing portfolio, perhaps?
Yeah. So we're looking so there's Verdian Insights, which is the holding company where we actually have a small team of, I'd say, sort of, we help provide sort of back office and transformation type talent. And then we have a series of companies that we own between 80 and 100% of. We're looking for businesses that we can scale rapidly across large geographies. So that's one. We're looking for businesses where, hopefully there is, going back to the Lindy principle, there's a long history of operations that can give us more confidence. We're looking for large user bases or memberships. So we have two businesses that we're combining right now that have nearly 10,000 members, senior compliance professionals, largely in North America, but some in Europe and around the world. Financial Crime Academy has had 30,000 people take their courses in 170 countries. So and then from a business, maybe diving into the business model perspective a little bit more, I'd put in two buckets. One is a business like Financial Crime Academy, which you created and really was very focused and operating really, really well. And we've actually learned a lot from at Verdian about how it's helped make us our other businesses better by looking at the playbooks and the operations for it that you created. So we actually don't need to spend a lot of mental time sort of on that business besides just sort of pouring more sort of fuel onto it and figure out, other ways to grow it. But operationally, it's really great. On the other hand, and we'll make decent returns from that. On the other hand, there are companies like Compliance Week or the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, both of which I bought this year, which were declining. They had declining revenue bases. And so they had some cost structures and operational practices that were not sound. And those we acquired for a different type multiple. And we really need to lean in and operationally improve those. And that's a much different sort of model than sort of the first bucket, like Financial Crime Academy. Both have their own, risks and rewards that are very different.
And if you had the opportunity, which bucket would you likely prefer over the other?
Florian, that's a question I've been asking myself for many years now. So I would prefer to find great businesses like Financial Crime Academy, acquire them, figure out how we can help them, how they can sort of leverage our, thousands of people that are within sort of the Verdian ecosystem. That would be great. But we also have to have sort of solid returns. So, to buy a business like Financial Crime Academy is at a decent price for both the buyer and seller, where you can get, we shoot for top tier returns, 25, 30%. That's really not easy. Right. And so we're trying to build an ecosystem where we can attract more Financial Crime Academy. So I would love to do that. I'd love to find more and go on to the next one and find the next partner that we can sort of plug into our ecosystem. But in the absence of that, we find some great opportunities with businesses where we can lean in where maybe they don't have any other alternatives. So if we get it right, the returns can be far in excess of 30%. They can be 100 or 200 or 300%. But we're taking on risk for to try to generate that type of return, and it's soaking up a lot of our mind share and time.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I wanted to get to as well. If you buy businesses which require work, possibly there are some limitations towards how often you can do a process as such. There are possibly difficulties in terms of scaling this model. How do you think about that aspect?
I think it's a phenomenal opportunity and really ignored by, or not overlooked by people looking for businesses to invest in. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think it is scalable because there are larger businesses that that you can apply these types of strategies and tactics to. I mean, I had a $1 billion business within Providence where we saw a lot of operational opportunity. They were, for example, had 20 call centers with 3,500 people where they were scheduling the workforce, on Excel spreadsheets. And so, there was no dynamic scheduling. There were opportunities like that to improve the business. So you can go bigger businesses. You can also, find smaller businesses that have similar improvement attributes that you can sort of apply a playbook to and do that sort of repeatedly. So we're looking at doing both. I'd say the central theme to probably both of those is focus. Going back to what I said earlier, within both ECI and Compliance Week, they've done a lot of things over the years. And what we've done is to really help think about what they do really well and different than others, and then figure out how do we scale that and cut back on some of the things that maybe they weren't doing as well.
And the approach that you're taking is possibly a little bit contrarian to, well, Berkshire Hathaway and what Warren Buffett may do. I think he's famous for saying it's better to buy a good business at a fair price than a fair business at a good price. How do you think about this?
Excuse me. Yeah, I find that if we were to those fair prices today, there are so many potential buyers. I mean, there are 20,000 private equity firms. And so when we're looking at businesses with no EBITDA, which are maybe the ones that are suffering a bit. But then I'm looking at businesses that are $1 million to 15 million in EBITDA. And if it's a good looking business, most people want to sell to the highest price. So there's a lot of competition. So I don't think there's a lot of fair prices necessarily available once you start competing with the thousands of private equity firms that are out there, unless you have the brand reputation maybe of a Berkshire Hathaway, which it's very hard to differentiate capital.
And I'm wondering along the lines of what you explained. When you look at Compliance Week as one of the examples, right? You acquired this from Wilmington. I think this was the prior owner.
Yes.
What was it about this particular acquisition that excited you, and how have you been possibly able to differentiate what you bring to the table from other interested parties?
Well, I had followed Wilmington for probably a decade, looking at it as a stock. I actually looked at it as, at the company itself in a previous role. I had also followed Compliance Week for several years, having a focus, even in the companies that I ran, I had a focus on governance, risk, and compliance within those businesses because they had issues in certain instances. And so I'd actually been to Compliance Week events before. And they had launched a process earlier in the year the year prior to me acquiring it. So that was 2024. There had been, again, this is I don't know all the details, but I think the market had sort of spoken and a deal had not gotten done. And we were probably one of the last ones at the table, if not the only one. Again, I don't know the specific situation, the details of the situation. Um, and I was very interested in the longevity of the business, the enthusiasm in the community for the business. I just thought the business, was sitting over here in the US, was owned by a UK company that was focused on other things. And so, for the price that I paid versus sort of the revenues and the offerings and um, the membership base, there were a lot of sort of intangible assets in the business that I feel like, um, if I was sort of half wrong on what we could do longer term, there was still value there for what I was paying for it. And I think it's
And what do you mean when you say there were certain aspects where you were half wrong?
no, if I were half wrong, if I
If you were half wrong. Okay.
oh, so when I look at a business, remember I've said they tend to be complex and trying to do too many things. Well, I try to identify what's the one thing that I can sort of focus on in the business where if I just focus on that, I know I'm going to get sort of a decent return. There are other things where I know we need to stop doing immediately. There are some things in the middle where I don't know, right? And it takes more research, and you're not going to actually get the answer until you own the business, and it might take you 3 months to figure out. So some of those things will work, and some of those won't. And if they work, they can turn um, a 20% return into a 30 or 40% return. So again, it's these instances where you just don't know where something's going to work.
It seems to be a very analytical approach and very investment outcome driven approach towards where you focus your time on. How do you actually determine this? I mean, when you look at a company before acquiring it and even thereafter, how do you do the math?
I try to break things down pretty granularly within, the business on one hand to sort of make sure I know sort of what's contributing to the positive aspects of the business and the negative aspects. Um, but then I also look at it very simply. I mean, one thing I've learned through the years is, again, obviously get rid of the complexity, which I've mentioned a number of times, but really focus on, the one or two economic drivers of the business and really zone in on that and do the math around what's the return on whatever that um, area of focus might be. And yeah. Does that answer your?
It does. And I think hand in hand with this goes, especially with the bucket that sits in the middle between the aspects which are clear to deliver a good return on your investment versus the aspects which don't, which you have to stop immediately. The bucket in the middle, it requires operational improvements, possibly. You mentioned earlier that you have a team, a back office team. Can you share a few of the operational measures that you've had good successes with in the past?
So there are a lot of tools that are fairly common that we start to, that we get people on that are lower cost, right? I mean, when I was back to IES, they were implementing, SAP and had spent, tens of millions of dollars on it, and we stopped. Today, there are more and more lower cost, more effective tools, particularly with AI, that are popping up, left and right. So, and they're changing faster though too. So, for deck creation, we create PowerPoints for clients and whatnot in sales materials. So, we were using PowerPoint a year ago or Google Slides, and then we started to use another product called Plus, and now we're on Gamma. So it's a lot of smaller tools. We'll put everyone on Box and Slack, and we literally have a spreadsheet that we try to get everybody on sort of the same playbook. We have everyone on sort of the same accounting system. Um, So it's maybe less about the 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 tool and getting sort of a consistent set of tools, across the businesses. If it makes sense for the business, sometimes it just doesn't make sense for the business.
So harmonizing and simplifying and taking out complexity by having the same infrastructure layer beneath it powering the various operational requirements.
Yeah, yeah. Because there are some elements of what, for instance, Compliance Week does. Right, there's a craft to the business. The journalists, when they're writing, that's a craft that can't be replaced, by technology in a high quality way right now. And so, doing everything we can to simplify all the processes behind that to make sure that they can focus on their craft is really important.
And James, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about some of the personal reflections that just came up in your life over the path of your career. So you've now been a CEO, well, a couple of times. You founded your own company, you're buying businesses, and all of these experiences require different skills and mindsets, I would claim. And if you're speaking to, well, let's say an ambitious executive, a professional who's considering making the leap from corporate leadership and executive career to building their own company, what's your advice? What should they think about before making that transition?
Yeah, I think you need to think about a couple of things. One is, really understanding what you're going to do better than to the next person. Again, it's going back to Peter Drucker. What's your personal value add? Um, what when you're looking at doing a podcast, creating a business, buying a business, what's going to be sort of the special sauce that you bring to the situation, because it's a very competitive world out there. And so really understanding and defining that is really important. And if you think you're going to go out and buy a recurring revenue business, with high margins and great returns on capital and make a lot of money, you know what? There are thousands of other guys, or women who want to do the same thing. And so the chances of you actually doing that are very slim. I mean, I just heard a stat that, 37% of, search fund deals, lose money. 1%, I think, don't even searchers don't even find a company to buy. So it's very difficult. And so my approach has been maybe taking the road less traveled a bit.
Sure.
And I think the key to that is, it does take some confidence, but it takes, some imagination. You need to look at a situation, not look at it for what you see on the surface, but having the curiosity of like really sort of understanding what's beneath it. Well, why does it look good or why doesn't it look bad? And then imagine what it could be. What can you do to sort of change, the situation? Because you can find some great opportunities that way. I mean, that's how I've built a career, is for the most part is looking at a situation differently than someone else and imagining what it could be and then working like hell to sort of get there.
Mhm. And success proves you right. I would say you navigated multiple business cycles, multiple different industries, regulatory environments, market conditions, etc. And that requires a specific kind of adaptability and flexibility. How do you personally stay sharp and continue learning and just never stop adapting to a changing world? How do you do that?
Um, I, I, before podcasts came along, I read a lot. I probably have well over 200 business biographies on my bookshelves at back at our main home in Greenwich. And, so I read a lot of old business biographies. There's a lot of great lessons in there. Um, you see a lot of mistakes that people make. You see a lot of ideas that maybe conflict with each other, and you need to sort of um, work through that. It gives you a great toolbox, as well. But now I listen to a lot of podcasts,
Mhm.
because the ideas that you can get from, listening to whether it be investing podcasts or product design podcasts, like Lenny's podcast, or HR podcasts, particularly when you AI podcasts. It's just a wealth of knowledge. And so I exercise almost every day, and that's what's in my ear. And so I'm sort of staying physically sharp, but then staying, I think, mentally sharp by just learning through the podcast, and then obviously networking as well. But I'd say that's a lot of what I do these days.
Hmm. And I'm going to ask a combined question. Can you perhaps just share a few names of your top biographies and a few names of the top podcasts that you like listening to?
So some of the best books, again, I've got a long list of a couple hundred of them. But there are some great books about some really um, uh, guys in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. People like Jimmy Goldsmith. There are a few biographies on and how he um, started some businesses and bought and built businesses and made mistakes, and then became an activist in some larger businesses. Um, Will Thorndike has a book called The Outsiders, which a lot of people have heard of and read. And that's another favorite. That's obviously more well known. And then podcast, again, it's a long list. I like a variety of podcasts. So again, for HR, I'll listen to Josh Bersin, who I learn a lot from there. Diary of a CEO is a very popular one. Invest Like the Best. I'll listen to Lenny's podcast about product design. Um, Again, it's I like to listen. Built to Sell Radio. I love hearing directly from the operators, people actually building businesses and selling them. I listen to Great Women in Compliance is another one that keeps me abreast of things in the compliance area, run by some people that I know. So it's a wide variety, and it changes.
Have you subscribed to Business Unbound yet?
I was just about to mention my latest and greatest is Business Unbound.
James, I wanted to touch on one other area, and we talked about this a little bit in the context of your previous CEO roles in a more technical capacity. From a leadership perspective and from a purely human perspective, I believe that mistakes and failures are where the real learnings are sitting. And looking back at your last 30 or 40 years of your career, what are some of the mistakes that you made, and what are more importantly the key lessons that you've learned over the years?
Well, a longer term perspective is, I'd say, first and foremost, um, you know, important to keep in mind. I mean, it's something that we're all sort of caught up in the day and sort of need that time to sort of step back, and that's everything from sort of business model, you know, has implications on business model and how we operate in the business every day, how do we treat people, how do we think about returns. So I think that's one area, and then constantly reminding ourselves about um, you know people come to work with different perspectives and goals, different backgrounds, um, and since I'm acquiring businesses, like there's a lot of history there, and sometimes you need to be respectful of that and really listen. I mean, that's one thing that I've tried to do a lot of is really listen, and that's where frankly, the best ideas are coming from listening. Sometimes, you really need to ignore um, a lot, but probably my one area that you can always do more of is sort of listen. And I see that mistake made by a lot of investors, um, and not sort of hearing from management teams where maybe the biggest levers of value creation are. And that's what I've seen. I've had a chance to talk to probably, a handful of some of the greatest investors out there. And one common thing that they do is they zone in within 5 minutes on the biggest value creation lever, and they don't talk about anything else.
It's really powerful.
It's very powerful. It's very powerful. Yeah.
And perhaps if we zoom out a little bit for our audience members who are typically executives, rising leaders, or entrepreneurs, you've been on both sides of major business decisions as an operator and also as an investor. What's the most important capability or rather mindset that they should start to develop right now to position themselves for leadership in, I would say, an increasingly complex business environment?
At the CEO or CFO level or the board level, it's capital allocation.
Mhm.
If you think about what drives a share price, it's pretty simple. I think about is there's the intrinsic value of the business as the numerator. So what's the value of that business? And there are a lot of things that go into it. A lot of people sort of drive that. And it's tough for one person to drive the intrinsic value of the business. And it can take years to make changes. The denominator is the number of shares in a business. And that's something you can change not instantly, but with one simple decision of like buying back shares. And so, if so you've got that, that intrinsic value of the business where there's strategy and governance and operations, but then there's like capital allocation and which drives things like the number of shares. You can make um, big changes with things like stock buybacks. You can make big changes with, M&A. You can make big changes with, things like dividend policies or not. And so making sure you understand and are as much of an expert as you can be in cap allocation, where there are big implications to like single decisions, is super important. So that's like, and that's probably an under people talk a lot about, but a lot about capital allocation. I'm not sure, well, I know boards are not, there's a lot of education and training to be done.
And what's a contrarian belief that you would hold about buying businesses or building companies that most people would possibly disagree with you?
I don't know if they would disagree after sort of talking through it, but in terms of how people are, acting and spending their time, I think that there are, a number of businesses that, the market has, voted with their feet or their dollars where that are, under, that are neglected, but great opportunities. So, people always talk about, where they buy businesses at 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 times, EBITDA. Some of when I actually have had periods of my life where I've searched for public companies to buy, and I found it's very, um, I shouldn't be looking for those types of businesses. I actually should be looking for businesses that are trading at 100 times earnings. And the reason is because they might be so poorly run or have such thin margins that actually you might be buying it for, it might not make any money. So the multiple is sort of infinite. But if you have a new CEO in there or someone sort of implementing a turnaround plan, um, that business can, drive huge margin expansion, better returns on capital, huge improvements in financial metrics, over a couple years and drive sort of great outsized returns like we've seen with IES, uh, or, Patrick Industries, which was another business that is up over 100x from when I was at Tontine and we first invested in it. Um, and again, the businesses like Providence, which had great returns and on the surface was sort of, some good businesses. A few years after I left, they started to buy businesses at higher prices, made some, which on the surface were good businesses. But fast forward a few years after that, and the company's in bankruptcy. Um, so again, the devil's in the details, and you've really sort of got to dig in sort of beyond that service level of, oh, this is a good recurring level revenue business, so I don't need to sort of dig in and really understand it as much as I should. So always got to drill
James,
out. Yeah.
let's actually start wrapping up our interview a little bit. And look, if our listeners remember just one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, one action that they should take immediately, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, I think really drilling down into maybe the potential opportunities in front of you, like an acquisition or an investment, really understanding it, and then imagining, what it could be, um, from both a shareholder creation perspective, but from a business perspective as well. Go deeper, think broader, reimagine more than anybody else that might be looking at it, and you might be surprised at what you can find.
These are some inspirational final words. James Lindstrom, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you, Florian.
Before we wrap up, let me highlight what I believe are the key masterclass level insights from this conversation. One thing that struck me throughout our discussion is how much James emphasizes clarity. In any transformation or turnaround, your job isn't just to have a plan. It's to simplify what the organization does, focus people's attention on what actually matters, and help everyone see how one decision ripples through the entire system. But here's the thing. Clarity only works if it's paired with genuine confidence. People need to believe you can actually deliver on what you're saying. Connected to that insight is something James learned the hard way: the power of patience and long-term perspective. He shared a sobering story about building incredible returns at IES and then selling too early. The stock eventually reached 200 times the price he sold it at. The lesson isn't about regret. It's about recognizing that if you're executing a buy and build strategy over a full decade, the returns compound in ways that completely dwarf the traditional 3 to 5 year private equity playbook. Patience, when you have a good business, is extraordinarily powerful. This ties directly into what might be James's most important insight. Capital allocation is the key to share price. He keeps coming back to this because most CEOs, even accomplished ones, don't understand it deeply enough. Your intrinsic business value matters absolutely, but the decisions you make about acquisitions, share buybacks, and dividend policy, those move the needle just as much. It's one of the most underappreciated levers any leader has. Now, James spent his early career in investment banking, living in the spreadsheets and models. But early on, he discovered something that changed how he thinks about business entirely. Culture beats spreadsheets every single time. When you're actually inside an organization working with real people from different backgrounds and experiences, the spreadsheet becomes just one tool among many. Understanding the people, their values, their ethics, the culture they create, that's where performance actually gets created. It's what separates a business that is merely profitable from one that's truly built to last. A framework that James has returned to again and again throughout our conversation is something he calls the Lindy principle, applied to business. What's been working well for a long time will likely continue to work well in the future. So when you're evaluating a business or planning a turnaround, you look at what the company does really well historically and you double down on that in the future. You strip away everything else. That core strength, proven over time, becomes your foundation for growth. But here's what ties all of this together. James always knows his personal value add. Whether he's stepping into a CEO role, acquiring a business, or building a company, he can articulate exactly what he brings to the table that someone else is not able to. That clarity about your own edge, That's what separates people who build real value from people who are just chasing deals. And finally, James shared a framework he used across multiple companies and turnarounds: strategy, operations, capital allocation, and governance. Those are the 4 key pillars. People run through all of them, particularly on the operational side. But when all 4 pillars are working in concert, that's when you see real value creation. What strikes me most about James is that he doesn't just analyze businesses from a distance. He actually understands them deeply, and then he reimagines what they could become. That's the real skill. That's what separates the true operators from investors and what separates the exceptional ones from everyone else. Now, a few final words. If this conversation resonated with you, whether you're an executive navigating transformation, an entrepreneur thinking about acquisitions, or simply curious about how the best operators really think about building and scaling businesses, please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. You can also head over to businessunbound.co. That's where you will find links to everything we discussed today, including resources that we talked about. And while you're visiting our website, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter to get notified the moment new episodes air. You'll be the first to know when we are dropping conversations with the next wave of forward-thinking leaders who are shaping industries and challenging conventional wisdom. Now, thanks for listening. This was Business Unbound for today, and until next time.